Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr, and because it is Tuesday night and the CFP rankings are coming out, also with Kevin Noon. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, if we gave every viewer on the stream 5 guesses each as to what we were talking about immediately before we hit record, I don't think they would get it. So, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing well, and if you guys want to go ahead and throw some guesses in the chats, it won't matter because we would never confirm. We will only deny. Kevin, how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I'm glad we can talk about football instead of other items. College football show is getting underway right now. Not a lot of turmoil out there, at least at the top. I'm going to be interested in seeing what happens to Tennessee, and not going to be able to listen to the audio, but I'm sure that they will spend 50 of the 60 minutes talking about the Big Ten probably not deserving 4 of the top 5 teams and why we probably should have none in the field.
Tom, you've got something. I can hear it.
No, I'm already so tired. You can tell, you know how you can tell when someone's kid didn't hear the word no enough when they were a child?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the SEC. But, Mommy, Georgia wants an Oompa Loompa now.
I just heard Kirby Smart talking about the CFP and does the committee prefer the Big Ten or the SEC, and he's blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, I'm not worried about it much. Really?
Well, now they've got another good win to make up for their multiple losses. Let me tell you something. If you have at any point this year said, I think Missouri deserves to be seriously considered, you can go shut up and sit in the corner with the Indiana discussion, because Indiana has as many good wins as Missouri, but hasn't gotten blasted into low Earth orbit by the only 2 competent teams they've played all season. Yeah. So that's my 30-second listen. We understand all of your opinions are based solely on, well, it's the SEC, so, and it's like, great. Thanks, Peter Burns. It's a real mystery what you think on any given item ever.
He
is Sankey's ventriloquist dummy.
I mean,
make sure Greg Sankey washes his hands before you shake his hand, I guess, is the big takeaway there.
Big takeaway there. The idea that the SEC is not getting a fair shake from the CFP is one of life's great jokes this year, because that is all they've ever gotten. And to think that they wouldn't get a fair shake this year because they don't get 5 teams in, they're going to get 4. Tennessee may get left out, but I mean, you can't take them all. You can't take all of the 10-2 teams. Some of them are going to have to be left out for other 10-2 or 11-1 teams. That's just the way it is. Where do we stop? Should it be 6 teams? Should Texas A&M be in there as well? Like, at what point should we just calm down and say 4 of 12 is a pretty good number, just as it would be for any other conference, and deal with it and go on? Because you had your opportunity. Once you lose that second game, you pretty much lost all claim to I should be here, because there's only so much room. So when there's only so much room, I should be on this boat. Well, you've already lost twice. We can't fit everybody. That's your own fault. Lose once, and maybe it'll be there'll be room for you.
But what if it's women and children? That's lifeboats. Sorry, and
well, I mean that's Group of 5. That's Notre Dame. That's ACC, and that's Big 12. That is the women and children of the CFP.
What about a door? And you write on a door in the ocean.
Notre Dame has done what they needed to do since they lost to Northern Illinois to stay in the conversation. If they lose one more, guess what? They're going to be out. And you've got, I think, things have gone pretty well for the Big Ten and the SEC the last couple weeks, because you look at the ACC, you look at the Big 12, the teams that plausibly could have lost the conference championship game and still made the field, Miami and unbeaten Miami, if they had been unbeaten and lost in the ACC championship game, they could have been a bid stealer and turned the ACC into a 2-bid league. They lost 2 weeks ago. BYU, unbeaten until last weekend. They could theoretically have lost in the Big 12 championship game and still made the tournament and made the Big 12 a 2-bid league. They lost now. So those 2 conferences are functionally going to be 1-bid leagues. the group of 5 is going to get one team. Even if Army wins out and Boise State wins out, the committee has, you look at where they have Army and it's like, maybe. I mean, if they win out and they beat Notre Dame, then Notre Dame's out and maybe Army gets that spot and it doesn't somehow knock Boise State out also. But, the Big Ten and the SEC are in a spot where there are going to be 8 bids between those two leagues. That's what, even in their extremely greedy, we want guaranteed spots, they wanted 4 spots each, and that's in potentially a 14-team tournament. So if you're getting 4 each this year, that's fine. Shut up. You don't need any more. Like, finish higher than 5th in the SEC. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I saw somebody on Twitter just in the last couple of days stumping for the 14-team playoff that there should be mandated 6 SEC teams on. And at that point, I said, it's time to sign off the computer. And I did, because I'm getting crankier in my old age, and I don't put up well with that kind of stuff. And I pop off, and then I end up getting into a 3-hour argument.
Well, I mean, you look at the SEC, and I don't know that every year is going to be like this, but you have 6 teams with 2 losses right now, and it's going to end up with more losses than that. But then you've got 4 others with 3 losses. At some point, there's going to be a 3-loss team that is in the CFP. I don't think we need to rush to that just yet. Let's go ahead and argue about the 2-loss teams that should get in, rather than kicking out some 2-loss teams for a 3-loss team. I think the 3-loss situation is something that will come through with the conference championship game, as we've got the rankings now. Yep. Tom, I will let you go.
25 Illinois, 24 UNLV. You will never guess which team jumped 2 spots up above where their AP ranking is to.
How are those clowns still ranked?
Is it Missouri? Of course it is. Do they have 3 losses and no quality wins and got murdered twice? Of course they did. What is our rule at the bottom of the rankings?
It tells you what's going on at the top.
It tells you what the committee wants to do at the top, because you can throw any garbage at the bottom to justify what you want to do at the top. There's no reason. Missouri unchanged. They're 7-3. They have no good wins. They've gotten absolutely obliterated twice. And of course, they're 23. 22 is Iowa State. 21 is Arizona State.
At least we have Illinois in the top 25, and that'll probably be short-lived to make room for another SEC team. Not sure who Illinois has this week, but then has Northwestern at Wrigley the last week for the Land of Lincoln Trophy, formerly known as the Sweet Sioux Tomahawk, which I'm sure there'll be people who say that's not PC, but I thought that was one of the coolest trophy names out there.
Forgot about that. Yep. Number 20, Tulane. I was just sanity checking myself. I thought, I swear, I remember Missouri losing last week, and they did. They lost to number 21. They lost to number
South
21
Carolina.
South Carolina.
Well.
But they are in fact they remain unchanged after their 3rd loss of the year.
That's a good quality loss.
South Carolina 18, Clemson 17. So the only 2 changes so far in the from the AP poll are South Carolina's 1 spot higher than they are in the AP poll, and Missouri is multiple spots higher than they were in the AP poll because they were unranked. Everything else is exactly the same. Colorado 16. So yes, it does feel like the committee is setting things up for, well, the SEC. You have to give it's the SEC. You have to give them 5 teams. You can't possibly leave out.
South Carolina jumps 3 spots in the CFP with their 34-30 win over Missouri.
Well, it was a good win for them, and it was a good loss for Missouri, and because F your feelings.
Everybody gets a trophy.
15 is Texas A&M. 14 is BYU. So what that does, and it does potentially bring up, is BYU drops 8 spots. They're down to 14. So what that opens up is the possibility that if Boise State wins out and BYU wins out, Boise State could theoretically get a first-round bye. As long as they are ranked ahead of BYU in the final rankings, it could be Boise State, the group of 5 representative, that gets the 4 seed and the first round bye, and BYU, potentially the Big 12 champion, could be could have to be the 12 seed and play a first round game. Colorado also in that conversation. Number 13 is SMU. So you've got a couple spots between BYU and Boise State. I assume Boise State will be 12.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 4 spots right now between Colorado and Boise State in terms of, who could win that Big 12 championship. I don't know if Iowa State's still alive. I don't think they are.
They're
They're
22
spots potentially.
They're 22 in here, and I mean there is a lot of confusion and tiebreakers, and you have a lot of people coming in demanding divisions being put back in to conferences in order to help, break up this logjam. As opposed
Boise State is 12.
Yeah, Iowa State has 2 losses in conference. The other 2 teams have 1 loss. So technically, I believe they're still alive.
Okay. And in case you're wondering exactly how crazy it is, the Big Ten finished their week on Saturday night, and it took until Tuesday for the Big Ten office to announce, if we've checked the numbers, and it turns out Oregon has clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. That happened literally today. So that's how crazy things are. Number 11, Tennessee, the first SEC team, I believe, that is ranked below where they are in the AP poll.
And
Number 10, Georgia. Interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
Georgia fans are not going to be happy about that.
But they're in. But
They
back
are in.
Tennessee
Number
is
11,
out.
Tennessee is in.
let's remember,
Number 11, Tennessee would be out.
Georgia is now the new number 1 FPI team according to ESPN, which gets you absolutely nothing, but except for emboldened arguments from Bark fans.
Number 9, Ole Miss.
Mm-mm.
So right now, it looks like the first 4 out would be Tennessee, SMU, Texas A&M, and Colorado, which would be the same 4 as last week. Miami ahead of Ole Miss and Georgia. Miami is 8 right now. Ole Miss and Georgia each jumped up 2 spots this week. Miami moves up 1 spot. They jumped BYU. Number 7, Alabama.
Up 3 spots with the 52-7 win over Mercer.
Listen. The Mercer Bears, Tony. Would you want to fight a bear? I wouldn't want to fight a bear.
Does Mercer crap in the woods?
But I would fight a bear with an elephant.
Does Alabama wear a funny hat? If you've seen any pictures of Bear, the answer is yes.
Tied.
Number 6, Notre Dame. So yes, we are going to have 4 Big Ten teams in the top 4.
Is there going to be any change?
5, sorry, number 5, Indiana.
So no.
Number 5, Indiana. I would assume it's going to be unchanged, which would be number 4, Penn State, number 3, Texas, number 2, Ohio State, and number 1, Oregon. But we have to watch some footage of Indiana to prove that they are, in fact, number 5 in the country.
Is it just footage of them fumbling and missing tackles?
It is footage of them playing Charlotte, which just fired its head coach, Biff Poggi.
But he went to practice today.
Maryland, which should fire its head coach, but hasn't, and then them playing Michigan State.
Let me throw a scenario while we're kind of waiting for these things. And you guys were driving home while I was sitting with some other writers. What would have happened if Oregon would have lost at Wisconsin? Because we know that when you lose, that matters to a certain degree, and they don't really seem to care about, head-to-head matchups. I mean, would there have been a movement of Oregon down?
I would assume you would move Oregon down at least a spot or 2 behind Ohio State and maybe Texas, because Penn State's number 4, Texas number 3. So Ohio State's going to be 2, Oregon's going to be 1. It's going to be the same top 5 as last week, same top 6, I think, as last week. I'm double checking my numbers right now, but Oregon should be the 1 seed, Texas the 2 seed as the 2nd ranked conference champion. Miami would be the 3 seed, Boise State would be the 4 seed, and then 5 will be Ohio State, 6 will be Penn State, 7 will be Indiana, 8 will be
Notre Dame,
9 will be Alabama, 10 will be Ole Miss, 11 would be Georgia, and 12 would be BYU. So I'll have a graphic with that in just a minute. I was just kind of double checking myself. Very interesting to me that Ole Miss is ahead of Georgia right now.
Well, you can't move Georgia ahead of Ole Miss because Ole Miss beat Georgia, and Georgia also lost to Alabama. So Georgia right now, because those two teams ahead of them don't have two SEC teams ahead of them, don't have a bad loss, the committee is kind of not able to move them. Like the scenario that Kevin was talking about, Wisconsin would be a bad loss for Oregon. So once you get that bad loss, is Vanderbilt considered a bad loss? Apparently not, because Alabama.
Well, they're an SEC team, so
correct. So there's different levels to that, as we show they show the brackets there on television. But Georgia has that roadblock of Ole Miss and Alabama, and the problem is those are two SEC teams. So right now, I think those four SEC teams are the ones that will make it in. Because I don't see Tennessee jumping Georgia at this point, because Georgia just beat Tennessee. So they've kind of closed the door. Texas A&M is so far out right now. Now beat Texas, and really all that happens is Texas drops to between Georgia and Tennessee probably. And so I think it's just those four SEC teams, and I don't know that anybody else can get in there.
Today, I was talking about the game I'd want to see the most, and that's Georgia having to go to Penn State in December.
Well, go. That would be it.
Now let's run through the bracket real quick in terms of what that first round would look like based on the current rankings. You'd have number 12 BYU, the Big 12 champion, coming to Columbus to play Ohio State. Number 9 Alabama going to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. Number 11 Georgia going to Happy Valley to play number 6 Penn State. Number 10, Ole Miss going to number 7, Indiana. Again, what a beautiful world it would be if Indiana gets to host a college football playoff game. That is almost too beautiful to exist in this world. I want to run through real quick. I pulled this up for a show that we did, that Tony and I did yesterday, and I want to see if I can find it. The average forecast, I can't find it right now, but the average forecast, high and low temperatures for December 21st in South Bend, Indiana, State College, Pennsylvania, Bloomington, Indiana. It's basically high temperatures in the mid to high 30s and low temperatures in the kind of high 20s, mid to high 20s on that day. We have heard for a generation that it doesn't matter that the bowl games are played in SEC country, and that they're more acclimated to the weather. It doesn't matter. That's where it is. Okay, I guess we'll see. I'm sure this won't actually play out this way, but man, this is for a generation what I think a lot of people have been waiting to see. Let's see Alabama have to come north in December. Let's see Georgia have to come north in December. That would be, even if just one or two of those happen, that will just be fascinating to see how that plays out.
I'm here for it. I would love to see that happen. I just think that Georgia Penn State game, I'm not even talking about lineup versus lineup. I'm just talking about location. I'm talking about all the Bark fans having to stay 95 minutes away because they can't get a hotel in State College or Altoona, and are going to have to stay in Bedford or Harrisburg and places like that. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because I talk to kids when they sign at Ohio State, from Florida and places like that, and we get them in February and it's cold as hell. I mean, and they're not out there playing football outdoors at that point. They're like, yeah, walking across the oval. This is before online courses. I don't really like doing that whatsoever at this point. And, you get a lot of players who admit but don't admit, I don't want to go north because I don't want to play in the cold. And then suddenly they realize that they have to go play their NFL career in Buffalo.
The resume comparison right now, they're putting up a graphic on ESPN that the strength of record, Penn State is 4, Texas is 5, Indiana is 6. Strength of schedule, 38th for Texas, 35th for Penn State, 106th for Indiana. Of course, that'll go up for Indiana this weekend with them coming to Columbus. But, strength of record, that's not strength of schedule. Strength of record, Indiana's 6. So guess what? Indiana's ahead of a bunch of the other teams that are pissing and moaning that Indiana hasn't played anyone. Indiana has done what they needed to do against their schedule. They have absolutely killed just about everyone they played. The Michigan game was close. Everything else they have just smoked people all season long, which if you were a good team, that is what you would do. We'll see what it looks like this weekend against Ohio State and Columbus, but it's hard to look at Indiana and say they've looked really shaky this year. They had one bad half against Michigan, and other than that, they have just put people in a blender all season long.
They've done more than they needed to.
Mm-hmm.
My tail of the tape will be dropping tomorrow around lunchtime, and I really kind of went through the schedule and even took the names off of the front of the jerseys and just really looked at it by numbers. But just to give you an idea of how different this is going to be for whether it's Curtis Rourke, who played at Ohio University, or the kids who played at James Madison, the three road games that Indiana has played, the venues have been a practice soccer facility at Northwestern, UCLA, where there are more tarps than paid tickets, and then the big one is Michigan State later in the season once Sparty has already packed it in. So it's going to be a little bit of a different world, but I get into a lot of the numericals and everything else. I mean, I even venture into Tom's neighborhood with EPA and some things like that. I had to read a refresher course because I use more simplistic stats in how I do it. And spoiler alert, I don't think it's going to be a very close game.
Wow, big Indiana for Kevin. That's shocking.
No, there was a comment from Jordan Kapler already accusing Tom of picking Indiana 52-6. I don't know what the heck that's all about.
That missed an extra point. That's pretty much negative Tom right there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The Lane Kiffin thing, talking about how he's talking to SEC coaches, and there's not a lot of incentive to make the conference championship game, which is exactly what you would expect a coach who is not going to make the championship game to say. He's like, look, he's talking to the media, but he's actually talking to the bosses. Like, people don't even want to go there. That place, that's for
it's too crowded.
weirdos.
Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Exactly. It's Yogi Kiffin, but there is some irony in that you're fighting to play an extra game so that you can get a week off. Like you're playing an extra game to get the bye, and there is truth to the risk reward and the incentive or the lack of incentive, because if Ohio State goes and they lose, are they still going to be the fifth seed? Like we see them, they're fifth here because they're 2 overall. But if they end up 11-2, are they still in that fifth seed, or are they going to fall down further and they'd still get a home game, but does it harm you to make it? And with one of these SEC teams, somebody's going to have a third loss coming out of that. Mm-hmm. And we'll go back to the first week we did this, the week before we did this. Thank you, Fort Wayne Buckeye, with the super chat. Hit the thumbs up, everyone. We would appreciate that. Where I asked Rich Clark, hey, what happens if you lose in the conference championship game? Do you get the data point of making the conference championship game? And he's like, not really. The only thing there is you would have had a good season to make it, so that's a plus. But if however you lose it, that's going to be taken into account. So you can definitely lose a playoff spot by making the championship game and losing in a way that the committee doesn't like. So beware going in there. And then of course, like if you're all even with all of these 10-2 teams in the SEC, and now you find yourself with one more loss than 5 other teams, should that third loss eliminate them when they were one of the top 2 teams in the conference to begin with? So I think that needs to be figured out. I do wonder, is there any way, will this be with the 14-team playoff and the SEC and the Big Ten getting their way, will their playoff spots be announced before the conference championship game so that you cannot be harmed by losing it? You see some people wanting to get rid of the conference championship games. I don't know that that's going to happen because of the money that it makes. But also, if it's only like it brings in, after it's all said and done, like $2 million per team, is it really worth keeping it if nobody wants it? If there's the less incentive to have it, do you keep it?
Well, let me answer that with the fact that money all goes directly to the conference, and so the TV networks want it because it's networked. It's high value inventory for a weekend when they otherwise don't have stuff. So even if it is negative and even if the coaches don't want it, it's not going anywhere. So don't worry about it unless they're going to really expand the college football playoff and add a whole another weekend, which I don't think is going to happen imminently. But just if you look at this year and okay, let's just play this out where it's Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. In order for Ohio State to get there, they'd have another win over a top 5 team this weekend against Indiana. So then you've got 2 wins in top 5 games, and that knocks Indiana down to, even if they're 10, you've got a couple wins over top 10 teams. You've won comfortably most of the season, most of your games. Your one loss is by 1 point on the road against the team that's number 1 in the nation. And then if they lose close in the Big Ten championship game, 3 points, 7 points, you now have 2 losses, both to the number 1 team in the nation by 1 score or 1 point. How far down are you going to drop them at that point? You're not going to drop them below a Penn State team that they beat head to head. If Texas wins the SEC championship game, you're not jumping someone else from the SEC over them. And, the only way I could potentially see that would be, to see Ohio State falling below a 5 if they lose a close Big Ten championship game is if Texas really kills Texas A&M and jumps Ohio State there, and then Texas also loses the SEC championship game close, then maybe Texas is 5. But if Texas wins the SEC championship game, you're not jumping Alabama 5 spots over Ohio State to make Alabama the 5 seed. You're not jumping Ole Miss 7 spots over Ohio State to make Ole Miss the 5 seed. Ohio State would have another quality win this weekend against Indiana. Presumably they beat Michigan the week after that, which is not, it's not a terrible win, but it's not a great win. It's just it's a win, and that's it. I don't think there's a ton of scenarios where Ohio State falls below 5, even if they do lose. If they lose the Big Ten championship game by 17 points, yeah, sure, absolutely. At that point, you have really put yourself in danger of falling to the 6, 7 spot at that point.
But even then,
but until then,
you'd still be moving somebody ahead of them that they beat.
Well, yeah. Is it? Who? Let's see what Alabama does. Who does Alabama have this weekend? I know they just jumped up 3 spots for beating Mercer. So, who knows? Maybe there's a lot of helium.
I think they probably go back into league play, but since we're not talking about their game.
They're at Oklahoma. It's Saturday night at Oklahoma.
Okay, at Oklahoma, and then they finish with Auburn. So that neither of those is going to be a ranked win. It feels very likely to me that Ohio State's either the 1 or the 5 at this point. And both of those, you look at where that spot is on the rankings or on the bracket. That 5 seed, we've had the debate all year on our board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Would you rather be the 1 or the 5? And the answer is always it depends on who you have to play. But
look at that bracket.
You're the 1 seed and you get Notre Dame or Alabama, who have just had to just gotten beaten up playing each other, and you're pretty well rested. And then or you get to play BYU at home, which Ohio State would probably be a 17, 20 point favorite there. And then Boise State in what would be the Fiesta Bowl, you're probably a 20 something point favorite there. To get to the college football semifinals and be a 3-score favorite in both of your 2 games, that's really not a bad path. If you're the 1 or you're the 5, those are the 2 spots in this bracket that I think you really would like to be. And I think either one of those is those are the 2 most likely spots for Ohio State to be right now. And those are probably the 2 spots that they would choose to be more than anywhere else.
I want to jump in really quick because we're talking about, earlier we're talking about the conference championship games, and they've said that they're not going to punish teams for losses in their conference championship games, but that they're going to celebrate, they're going to reward wins, which of course the math doesn't work out, because if, people are like, why did this team move down? No, it's a team moved up over them. So you move down by a result of it. But then again, they also tried to say that in 2014 with Baylor and TCU, and then Ohio State hangs 59 on Wisconsin and a 59-0 win. And, that's all history now at this point. But the reality is that you have to find a way to make the math work for an additional data point. It was a lot easier to just sit there and say, well, we're going to deal with the conference championship games in this way or another, when you weren't even putting every conference champion into the playoff because it was only a 4-team playoff. You're now going to have a lot of teams who are not going to that conference championship game, who are sitting and resting, but most importantly, there's no chance of them losing the game because they're not in the game. They're not in the stadium. They're not even in the state likely. So, I will be very curious to see how they are able to make good on that, because that is something that I've heard on the Rich Clark call that we got on with the simulated, bracket. It's something I remember getting on a previous call with. I'm still not exactly sure how they make that happen.
Well, let me refresh people, because I've got the quote right here that I asked Rich Clark about this. How do you keep from punishing somebody that makes it to the conference championship game? And he said this: well, what I'll say is, I don't think just the virtue of the fact that they made it to the conference championship game, I don't think that's the data point. I think the data point is, how did they perform in that championship game? And the committee will look at that. I mean, they will have watched the game and judged them against the opponent, but I wouldn't say that they get extra points because they were in the championship game. But certainly their road to get to the championship game is going to give them a boost, because clearly they had to have a pretty significantly good performance in their season to get there. So that's going to be the boost. And then how they perform in that game will be judged. But the fact that they're in a championship game, I don't think that is going to be a major data point that the committee will evaluate. It'll just be what happened in the game. That's the data point. So there is danger, like there has always been with the CFP. There's a danger in making the conference championship game and losing it. And, it's, if you win it, you're in. If you lose it, you're out, and somebody may sneak in there. But the idea that nobody's going to be punished for losing is not true, because they're saying, like, just, hey, if you beware. Like, basically, if you make it, beware of what might happen if you lose badly. So don't do that. And you've got teams that would rather just chill out and sit in like Georgia. I don't think they mind where they are right now, even though they're going to complain. They're in without playing. If they play in the championship game and lose, they're out.
I mean, here's the thing. If you're in a gold medal match in the Olympics and you come in like it's like, a track event and there's like 8, whatever, and you do so poorly, they don't like kick you out of the next Olympics or something like that. I just don't understand how you can get away with really hammering somebody if they come out and they play really poorly. I mean, because we've had people try and say, well, do you rest players at at this point or another point because you're already secure in the field? One thing that I know for sure, there will be outrage, and on Sunday, Selection Sunday, we will have plenty to talk about. Hopefully, on the way coming back from Indianapolis and talking about all of that versus, but then again, maybe not. Maybe you just don't want to go to your conference championship game. Will there be a point where a team says, nah, we're good. We're playing for a natty. We're not playing for a conference championship game. We don't want to take a chance. We're going to decline. I mean, then what? Then that's just a team of chicken bleeps. So I don't.
Yeah. I mean, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have a team decline to show up there. And I think until you see a team, if you lose by 10 points in the conference championship game, I don't think you're dropping. If you get 59-0 by like Wisconsin did to Ohio State in 2014, that's one thing. If you lose 35-3, that's one thing. I don't think if you lose 31-20, you're going to get plummeted down the rankings, because that would really be against the best interests of everyone who runs college football to see teams punished like that. I don't think that's going to happen. The one thing that I would be concerned about based on the precedent from last year is, okay, your quarterback gets a Joe Theismann kind of injury in the conference championship game where there's no hiding it. There's no question. He's out for the year. That's it. You can't pretend. Then what? Do you get the FSU Jordan Travis screw job from last year? Because if you do, then that really sets a terrible precedent. But they set that precedent last year. So,
well, I think it's almost better to not have the proof that you have bad quarterbacks behind the starter. The air of mystery is probably better than confirming any of the questions. And that's what happened when they played 2 games without Jordan Travis. The committee got a really good look. And so there's the danger there. Either it's better to not show what you've got, or if you have to show it, you better show it well. And Florida State didn't. So that's another concern for whoever's in this game. And whether, we've talked about, will they hide injuries or whatever? You're eventually going to be exposed in this process. And if you get away with it, congrats on making it to the playoffs. Do you think you're going to win it all with whatever you've got? Probably not.
I know we've got the call coming up in about 10 minutes, but
Ward is still on
Ward
TV
Manuel's
right
on
now.
right now.
So Tony's got a minute. I know our goal is to get rid of him, but not quite yet. Not quite yet. I'm getting questions in the queue. Right now, it cuts off Tom's face. Good or bad thing, you decide. But I'm trying not to put questions up. Once we have Tony drop off, we both shift up a little bit, and then everything works.
Yeah, and let's just run through the format of this real quickly, just where these games will be played based on where things are right now in the bracket, just because I feel like this is probably a useful exercise for people just in sort of understanding how these teams are slotted in. First round is all at the campus site of the higher ranked teams. So it's BYU at Ohio State, Alabama at Notre Dame, Georgia at Penn State, Ole Miss at Indiana, based on that bracket right now. The playoff quarterfinals are all based on the existing bowl contracts. So Boise State, as the number 4 team, they are going to be in the Fiesta Bowl. That's the New Year's Eve game. So if Ohio State ended up slotted in the 5 seed like this, whether it's BYU as the 4 seed or Boise State as the 4 seed, either one of them would get slotted into the Fiesta Bowl. That is New Year's Eve that game would be played, that quarterfinal game. The Miami, the number 3 seed, the ACC champ, is going to go to the Peach Bowl. That will be noon on New Year's Day. So it would be the Georgia Penn State winner playing Miami noon on New Year's Day. The Big Ten champion, whether it's Oregon or Ohio State or Indiana, whoever that is, they will go to the Rose Bowl. That'll be kind of late afternoon New Year's Day. I think that's a 4:30 kick, 5:30 kick, something like that, East Coast time. Right now that would be Oregon taking on Notre Dame or Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And then the SEC champion is contractually slotted into the Sugar Bowl. So that would be like 8:30 on New Year's night. So it'd be Texas versus the Ole Miss Indiana winner in the Sugar Bowl in the quarterfinal. Then the playoff semifinals, those are located in the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl. The number 1 seed goes to whether it's the Cotton Bowl or the Orange Bowl, the location that is more convenient to them, closer to their campus. So if it's Oregon, they would go to the Cotton Bowl. So that would be Oregon versus the Ohio State, Boise State winner in the Cotton Bowl. And that remains the Cotton Bowl, even if it is, Alabama wins the first round and Alabama wins the second round. And then, it would be closer for them to go to the Orange Bowl. Doesn't matter. It's once that goes out on Selection Sunday, you're locked in there. So the top half of that bracket, because of Oregon being the number 1 seed, would go to the Cotton Bowl. The bottom half of that bracket would seed into the Orange Bowl. So you could conceivably have number 2 Texas playing number 3 Miami on Miami's home field, which is kind of a weird quirk, but it is a possibility that could be how that shakes out. And then the national championship game on January 20th, and that is in Atlanta. So that's how that looks. You could have, if Georgia has a run through the playoff as the 11 seed right now, they would have to go to Happy Valley, but then they would play in Atlanta in the quarterfinals, in Miami in the semifinals, and then back in Atlanta for the national championship game. So
that's not fair.
Boy, you sound like Kirby Smart.
No, I can't believe they would have to not play all of their games in Atlanta. This is not fair.
Oh, I know. It's extremely
like Kirby Smart.
Yeah. Can you imagine having to play a game outside your own state or a bordering state? Yes, I know how far Athens is from Miami. I know they're not that close. But
when you drive really fast, it's not really that far.
Yeah. Well, who in Georgia drives fast? Come on.
All right. I'm going to jump off. I'll be right back.
All right. Wave when you're done, and I may or may not add you.
And we've got, let's see, I'm going right now. Let's jump this one in because this is from Fort Wayne Buckeye. We have a bunch of a bunch of comments in here and questions on here that we want to get to. But here's an interesting one from Fort Wayne Buckeye. With the bracket as it is right now, I assume Ole Miss at Indiana would be the one Friday night game. So here's how that first round is going to go. There's one game on Friday night, and then it's like the New Year's Day. There's a noon, there's a late afternoon, and then there's an evening game. The two least desirable games are probably going to be assigned to the noon and early afternoon slots on Saturday the 21st. Here's why. ESPN has the rights to the Friday night game and the Saturday night game. The early Saturday afternoon game and the late Saturday afternoon games have both been subleased out to TNT. And the reason is because there are NFL games going on at that same time. The NFL is playing games on the afternoon of the 21st, Saturday the 21st. So those games are going up against NFL games, so that those are not going to get great ratings, most likely. So right. If you look at the games there, I mean, to me, if I'm programming it, Ole Miss, Indiana is the noon game on Saturday the 21st. BYU at Ohio State is probably the late afternoon game on Saturday the 21st. I know you're getting Ohio State off their spot at noon, and I'm sure that will upset a lot of Ohio State fans, but we'll see. And, the Georgia-Penn State game and Alabama-Notre Dame games, Georgia-Penn State's probably your Friday night game, and Alabama-Notre Dame, just because you got two like big-time brands there, that would be probably your Saturday night game as this is laid out right now. Kevin, I know you have as much or more of a TV background as I do. Do you disagree with anything I said there?
I make Georgia-Penn State the Saturday night game because of travel concerns of getting in there and trying to – I know the goal is not to put butts in seats and everything else, but the schools certainly would like to have the revenue. The home team would certainly like to have the revenue of there. And, again – we need to be agnostic of this and agnostic of that. But I would probably have Georgia, Penn State, and we got a super chat coming in that'll get to here. I would probably do Georgia, Penn State as my Saturday night game, and then I would do the Bama Notre Dame as my Friday night. While there's not a lot of places to stay in South Bend, you can fly in and out of Midway, stay on the south side of Chicago or something like that, Hammond, Indiana, even Merrillville, Crown Point, and be able to get in and do that. So that would be my consideration there. I think Ole Miss, Indiana, even with the intrigue, is by far the weakest of the four games. But BYU, Ohio State is also going to probably be considered a pretty weak game. But Buckeyes turn on eyeballs.
Buckeyes do turn on eyeballs. It just, I know that BYU has a national fan base. It's just not as big of a national fan base as a lot of those others. And, Alabama, Notre Dame, Georgia, Penn State, to me, those are the biggest draws there. And if you slide Ohio State one spot on that, if you flipped Ohio State and Penn State, then Ohio State, Georgia is the easiest Saturday night choice in the history of Saturday night choices. So that's where that would probably end up. The travel concern is certainly a question, and as a tiebreaker, that's a good point, and I'm sure if Georgia fans have to find out what it's like to try and travel to Penn State, good luck, friends. You'll have a great time. Multi-leg flights into Harrisburg, and then you might be able to fly direct from Atlanta to Harrisburg, maybe.
And if you're watching this, check out our Hungry Huddle episodes, Altoona Pizza this year, and then you can go back prior to Haas's Steak and Seafood, which is like just, a Ponderosa on steroids. I mean, probably a nice Ryan's is how I would put Haas's at my point, but I have an affinity for it. I probably am giving it a little too much credit.
All right, so Rose Quartz Lemonade, Super Chat. What's up, y'all? Hope y'all have been doing well. Quick question for you. Do you believe this year's offensive line is a championship level group? They're a group I question, and recently B's defensive line is good enough. Offensive line, not sure. I think that this is an offensive line that is good enough to win a national championship, given all the other talent around them. They've looked very good the last 2 weeks. We'll see this weekend against Indiana, and maybe even more so next weekend against Michigan, because Michigan, for all their flaws, has a really good defensive line. But I think given the talent around this offensive line, I think they're good enough. I think they're not, I don't think they're the best offensive line in the country. Maybe that'll change as they continue to grow and develop together. It feels like there's been significant progress there with Donovan Jackson at left tackle over the last couple of weeks, but he has not gone up against Abdul Carter the last couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop. But I mean, Kevin, I look at this offensive line, and for long stretches last week against Northwestern, I did not find myself thinking about the offensive line at all. It was just kind of, yeah, they're fine. Like, just in a way that you don't think about long snappers when long snappers are doing their jobs. The offensive line was just kind of fine for me, and that's probably good enough to be a national championship for Ohio State.
Somebody asking where the Chicago Hungry Huddle is. It is in my camera still. I need to finish it. When I write Hot 11, when I write Tail of the Tape, it's always the same thing when I have to talk about the offensive line. When we're not talking about them, that's generally a good thing. When we are talking about them, that is generally a bad thing. There's not necessarily a stat out there that you're going to look at and circle. If the team's running well, you're not going to necessarily put it with the line and be like, it's because the line has done this. You're going to say it's because the backs have done that, which is not entirely true. If the quarterback is not getting sacked, you're still not necessarily going to be like, well, that was a hell of a performance by the offensive line. It's just an invisible position. They are a Joe Moore semifinalist for offensive line unit of the year. I don't believe that they will be a finalist, but they're good enough. They're good enough. And honestly, they need to be good enough. They don't need to be great. I don't think just good is going to be good enough either. I mean, we saw what happened with Alabama, and sorry to bring Seth McLaughlin into this, and they kind of had problems against the team up north, and that derailed their championship run. So you don't want your offensive line to cost you a game, and I don't think that with the current configuration of Ohio State's offensive line that they have that type of liability. It all could have gone away with the injury to Josh Simmons. I don't think the Zen Michalski move worked out. He got hurt, wishing him a speedy recovery and everything else, but that wasn't the right place at the time. That's not to say that he can't play tackle at Ohio State. He just wasn't ready to play tackle at Ohio State that day. And I still don't think that day is this Saturday or next Saturday. It's not going to be a 2024 thing.
No, I think at this point they've found their answer. I think they've got their combination now with Donovan Jackson at left tackle. Ryan Day said that actually had him lose a little bit of weight to be a little quicker on the outside. So, now you're not looking to move him back inside when Zen Michalski does come back. It feels like with Carson Hinsman playing as well as he has and Donovan Jackson playing as well as he has, I think they've got what they're going to have now, barring any sort of further injury. How often do we talk about the offensive line needing to gel, play together, practice together, get all those reps? Donovan Jackson really has not played a lot of left tackle before the point where he stepped in just a couple weeks ago. Now he's improving quite a bit. You're seeing almost like an exponential growth curve just because he's getting so many more reps each week now compared to his entire career of reps at left tackle. It's not like he's been playing left tackle for 4 years and now he's getting another week of reps. Your learning curve goes vertical very quickly at the start. And then, and you're going to flatten out at some point, but he's still in that real growth curve where he's getting better and better every week, where I would expect him, he's better now than he was a couple weeks ago. I would expect him to be substantially better by the time you go through, potentially another 2 months. We are 2 months and 1 day from the national championship game. Another 2 months of practice at left tackle. How much better could he get there? I think you stay where you are right now. Keep it as is. Rose Quartz Lemonade with a follow-up. DBs, not Bs, my bad. But yeah, the play of the DBs has been kind of concerning. Unfortunately, really recently I have questioned the ones unquestionable. I think, to me, Kevin, I look at the safety play, and you can maybe include Jordan Hancock in that as well. I'm grading the safeties as an A this year. I think the safety play has been outstanding with Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs and Jordan Hancock The corners have had their issues. Igmanosin getting flagged. Burke has given up some long throws. Jermaine Matthews, there were guys who got open on him. They didn't always connect last weekend, but they got open on him last week. So the corners, I think, are a little bit more of a concern, but you're relying on the opposing team you got to execute those. It's not like these guys are running wide open. Guys have made nice back shoulder plays quite a bit, and that's something we see Indiana do quite a bit. And so that's going to be something to watch certainly this weekend. Indiana, Curtis Rourke has been very, very good with the back shoulder throws this year. But you also, the pass rush has been so much better, and they've been getting the quarterback more. That's going to help those guys in the secondary quite a bit. I think moving forward, I'm going to be fascinated to see if we get a rematch of Ohio State and Oregon and in Indianapolis. I am going to be fascinated to see what that game looks like, as those two teams now have that first game to sort of iterate off of, and then also probably knowing in the back of their heads, hey, you might see them again in January at some point.
I'll say this. I understand what Rose Quartz Lemonade. Rose Quartz Lemonade. I had to go back and look at it because I had to put up Mike Ferguson's comment, even though it's poking fun at me. We'll get to that in a second. Ohio State has given up 6 passing touchdowns this year. 6. 2 of them to Oregon. It's either 6 passing and 4 rushing or the other way around. But the point is, Ohio State's not giving up a lot. I'm not that concerned about what happens between the 20s. Now, Ohio State's field goal defense has not necessarily been great. Teams seem to kick field goals pretty well against the Buckeyes, but I'm okay with that as long as the Ohio State offense keeps moving. If Ohio State were giving up 2-3 touchdowns a game in a couple of games, and we'll start punching Tony's comments in too, then I would probably have more concerns. Yes, and there was a question that was brought up, I think, on more than one occasion about Denzel Burke and his confidence and everything else. I mean, is he frustrated? I mean, and corners have to have a short memory and things of that nature. So Jim Knowles isn't going to try and coach the aggressiveness out of IGB. You want him to be a little less handsy to the point that he is not public enemy number 1 when it comes to the officials, that he is not on a sheet that is handed to them before the game starts. Watch this guy. But I'm not overly concerned. I mean, this is going to be the case of, is this Ohio State's biggest test in the passing game of the season, more so than Dylan Gabriel at Oregon? I like Oregon's weapons a lot better than I like the weapons at Indiana, and that's not a slight of Indiana. It's just a matter of reality when you have because they don't have him right now, Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and then Ferguson, the tight end. Indiana's got some dudes, but we'll know a lot more in less than 7 days.
Let's pop in that comment from Tony about the Georgia writer asked if there was a discussion about moving Georgia up based on all of the ranked teams they've played compared to the teams above them who haven't played as many ranked teams. And let's just run through the teams that Georgia has played. They beat Clemson 34-3 week 1. They lost to Alabama by a touchdown on September 28th. They beat Texas by 15 in DKR. That's a really good win. Really good win. They got thumped by Ole Miss 28-10 last 2 weeks ago. Then they beat Tennessee 31-17. I think something else that needs to go into that conversation is they've had a couple games against pretty unimpressive teams. Kentucky, they beat them 13-12. Probably should have lost that game. Florida, 34-20. If DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt, you might lose that game. They have not been consistently dominant. They've been basically 500 against the good teams on their schedule. So yeah, you beat Clemson, you lose to Alabama, you beat Texas, you lose to Ole Miss, and you beat Tennessee. So you're 3-2 against the good teams on your schedule. So yeah, you want to tell me that you want to slide Georgia up a spot over Ole Miss? I mean, sure, you could slide them up, but you just lost by 18 points to Ole Miss. So I don't think you can really do that. And if it was Alabama there, and it's 1 point on the road or 1 touchdown on the road, and it's a month and a half ago, yeah, you could certainly, you could flip them there, and then maybe you move them ahead of a Miami as well. But Ole Miss hasn't been that great, and Ole Miss thumped Georgia. That was not competitive. You lost by 3 scores just a week ago. Here we go. Ward Manuel dropping a bomb. Asked what they look for in games like Ohio State versus Indiana. He said, we're looking at a lot of variables. How do the offensive play? How do the defenses play?
Maybe they should look at special teams too. I mean, that's, another aspect, 4 to 6, A to B, however many units strong, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's boy, I read the start of that and I was like, oh man, here we go. And then no, Tony was a little sarcasm.
It's just sarcastic, Tony. We should probably not invite him back.
Super chat from Rose Quartz Lemonade. I appreciate the talk down. How much better is our defense than last year, in your opinion? I thought the D was this good until the Michigan game last year. The answer is let's see. Let's see how it looks against Indiana. Indiana has put up big points. Indiana has put up pinball numbers against a lot of teams this year. Let's see how it looks against Indiana. Michigan's not going to be really, much of a test on that front, probably, just because they have really not been able to do a whole heck of a lot of anything this year. But let's see what it looks like against Indiana. Indiana, just to run through their schedule, just against Big Ten teams, 42 points against UCLA, 42 points against Maryland, 41 points against Northwestern, 56 against Nebraska, 31 against Washington, 47 against Michigan State, and then 20 against Michigan. If Ohio State, Michigan just said something very unflattering about their offense. Their defense is still very good, and they played a good game on defense as well. That was one of the best games I've seen out of guys like Zeke Berry for Michigan. They did not have Will Johnson. If Ohio State holds Indiana to 21 points or less, I think you could feel pretty decent about things. If Ohio State holds Indiana to 10, 14 points, I think you could probably feel pretty good about things. I'm not expecting Indiana to be able to run the ball particularly well against Ohio State. Like, you might see them at 2 yards a carry, something in that neighborhood. If that's the case, then Curtis Rourke really needs to play the game of his life if Indiana is going to have a chance to win. We'll see. I mean, what do you think? I don't know that I can really give you an updated grade on the Ohio State defense until we see them play maybe Oregon again in Indianapolis.
Well, that's the thing. And let me jump in on Michigan's defense. I'm on my spreadsheet that I put together for Indiana's tail of the tape. I'll have to put one together for Michigan's, probably starting that one tomorrow morning. Michigan's great against the run, only allowing 102.4 yards. I don't necessarily have their schedule in front of me. They've not been great against, in some of the other just base metrics, giving up 233 yards a game, giving up 23 points a game. That 23 points a game, that's the truest metric I'm going to look at right now, because it's not about how many yards you score. I've never seen a win-loss column that has the points as a real factor. It's just, points allowed, points scored. Who gives a crap? Mm-hmm. They're 56th in the nation. Ohio State's giving up 10.3 points per game. Now, Ohio State has already played a pair of top 5 teams. Yes, it gave up 20 or 32 to Oregon. That is the outlier for the season, but that is also the best opponent that they faced. But then against Penn State, they gave up far fewer. And honestly, they only gave up 6 points on the defense because they also had the pick 6. So there is a little bit of a mixed bag there. I think it's going to come down in a lot of ways to how Jim Knowles calls things. How Jim Knowles, I think year 1, Jim Knowles was way too aggressive. I think in year 2, Jim Knowles was way too conservative. I think so far we've seen a better mixture, but I think in both of those years up until the Michigan game, there wasn't a lot of concern about the defense. It's like, everything's hunky-dory. Okay, year 1, we bake in these big plays. Year 2, they make the correction. I feel it's a better defense, but it's how I feel doesn't necessarily dictate a damn thing. And if it did, I would be, I would be retired by now.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, Ohio State giving up a couple touchdowns to Evansville, up only 28-14 at the half. That has to be a concern for the committee. I'm sorry, I'm being informed that is actually basketball. Tony says, we've been impressed with how Notre Dame has recovered since that loss to NIU. Yeah, I think Notre Dame, when they lost to Northern Illinois, I think I just kind of went, yeah, okay, well, they're done. See you next year. they have bounced back nicely. They have a couple good wins. You got to remember, they have a road win over Texas A&M week 1. And they've also, you go through their schedule, they beat Louisville at home, which is no longer a ranked win. They really thumped Navy 51-14. Yeah, again, that's not a ranked win. And I think the fact that Louisville lost their game last weekend, that hurts a couple teams. Louisville was an important part of the resume for a couple teams. Notre Dame, they've really got to handle Army this weekend because they don't have, outside of the Texas A&M game, which was Saturday, August 31st. It has been a minute. They have just really not played a very good schedule this year. The whole schedule is one at Texas A&M. There's your big signature win. Lost at home to Northern Illinois. One at Purdue. Beat Miami of Ohio. Beat Louisville. Beat Stanford. One at Georgia Tech. That's probably your second best win right now. Beat Navy. Beat Florida State. Beat Virginia. And then you've got Army this weekend in Yankee Stadium. And then at USC. There's really not a signature win there. And, with the way the committee talks about week 1 games and, well, boy, that was a long time ago. If they're putting Clemson in at some point, they're going to talk about the fact that week 1 was a long time ago. And a lot has changed since then. And that's Notre Dame's big signature win. But speaking of Clemson, Tony says, someone asking about Clemson being number 17 and I'm about to bail. Yeah, that's every beat has its questions. So that's they call on the people they call on. Well, and Doug Shepard says Notre Dame gets credit for beating Texas A&M before they figured things out. I don't think they could beat them now. Well, I mean, unfortunately, that's when the game was scheduled, and there's a certain amount. I saw someone on the chat earlier saying, "Well, what do you think? What would be the score if Indiana played at Alabama this weekend?" I can say Indiana 72, Alabama nothing, and you can't say you're wrong because you don't know. I mean,
right.
We know what the score was when those teams played, and you can look at the scores more recently, and you can think, well, I think it's much easier to say something like Ohio State has a decent chance to beat Oregon this weekend based on the fact that, or in Indianapolis, just based on the fact that was a 1-point game. They didn't lose by 10 points. They didn't get killed. It was on the road, all that kind of stuff. Texas A&M lost by 10 points at home. I don't know that you can just automatically go, oh, well, everyone knows they would beat them.
We're going to get a big referendum on A&M at the end of the season when they play Texas.
Yeah. Tony says, I need to look at the math.
I said this.
Oh, you said that. Okay. Sorry.
Somebody was asking if we know who's playing in the SEC championship. I said, I need to look at the math of the SEC, not that they can, to have an idea. So we need to figure out a way when we're all on the admin side of things to have differentiation so we know who's talking. Generally, it's me because Tom and Tony are on the air, but with one of these shows where I am still doing things here. Let me see what we have in the star chats. We may or may not necessarily get back to a lot of these because I have 30 in here. We're already an hour into the show. This show flies by.
Yeah, it does.
Penn State loses to the Gophers this weekend to make it a moot point. I mean, it would make it a moot point for Penn State. Wouldn't necessarily change anything. I think there would still be people saying that if Indiana gets stomped by Ohio State, if that's the case, then you go from there. I was just checking a text message I got, but
So
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm trying to answer some text messages.
Yeah, so there is a report about an injury at Ohio State practice, potentially a very significant injury at Ohio State practice today. Not anything we can confirm right now, but we'll be keeping an eye on that. That would be a pretty significant one if that is in fact something we can confirm later. All right, so let's run back to some of these. We'll kind of zip through some of these questions while we're waiting for Tony to come back. Fort Wayne Buckeye says, bold prediction, Penn State loses to the Gophers this weekend to make it a moot point. Yeah, if Penn State loses to Minnesota here, they might very well, just based on the lack of real signature win, they might legitimately fall out, especially if they lose. Minnesota's just They're very, very mid this year. If they do fall out, that would be, if they do lose, they very well might fall completely out of that whole thing. TE13 says, thoughts on the Big Ten confusing itself with its own tiebreakers and announcing Oregon clinching on a Tuesday. Yeah, if you missed that, the Big Ten put up, I'll throw up the graphics real quick, where they put up, here's all the different tiebreaker scenarios, and scenario 1 through like scenario 10, and they put together outcome. If Oregon and Indiana both win out, then they both finish 9-0. Then it would be Oregon and Indiana, and the designation, which one would be the number 1 team would be based on the highest cumulative conference winning percentage, yada, yada. I'm not going to go through all these. The point is, they went through all of these things. They put 2 pages together, 10 scenarios, and then got to the end and went, oh, well, turns out there's no scenario where Oregon doesn't make it to the Big Ten championship game. So then they put out a graphic today. Oregon, congratulations, you've clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. It's like, if it takes you till Tuesday afternoon to make that determination, things may be a little overly complicated. You should be able to sort of figure that out beforehand, or at least end of the night on Saturday. But surprise, Oregon has clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game as of Tuesday.
Right. It's just weird that it took that long. I mean, obviously you would think that they would, under a much more normal world, it would have been out within 30 minutes of the end of the game. Hell, it would have been pre-written or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, you really do have to run it through IBM Big Blue or whatever to figure all of this out. So, it's interesting. But here's what I don't want. I don't want them going back to damn divisions. And I'm already seeing some of the learned national football writers calling for divisions, guys that don't necessarily have to cover some of these just terrible divisional games every damn year. They don't have to go to College Park every other year. It's easy for them to say all of that, but I think that the answer is going to be more conference games. You don't expand your conference to play the same amount of conference games or fewer conference games or things like that. But I don't think. There's just no way. There's no way unless you do the ACC coastal and Atlantic type of situation of where you're splitting stuff up. That it just doesn't make sense, and you almost have to have a case that every 4 years you're recycling your divisions to have some sort of semblance of parity, or you're going to have, every year the East beat the West, that was the situation. And then you had leaders and legends, and leaders won every damn time. So obviously the Big Ten did a horrible job of putting divisions together. So
here's one from Jordan Kapler. You guys are forgetting the rule of the SEC. Once you hit the 2-loss threshold, any subsequent loss counts as a win. Speaking of losses counting as wins, Tony is back with us. Tony, how's it going?
Subtraction by addition.
Not all losses do count as wins. I finally bailed because there was a Georgia caller writer asking, Georgia's played 5 of your top 17 teams and they've won 3 of those games. Like, do you look at that? Do you look at the strength of schedule when you look at this? Like, are you blind to the superiority of those 3 wins? So yeah, they look at everything. Strength of schedule is not the only thing they look at. Oh, and then Ward reminded him as the call was ending that, Georgia did lose to Ole Miss and Alabama. So those 2 teams are right in front of them. So it's going to be good luck getting past them, basically, was the words as he was saying, see you later.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Tony, I've been dying to hear more about Clemson. No. Tell me all about Clemson. Spare no detail.
That's really where I checked out. That was the point where I checked out. Because then the question was about Clemson, and then South Carolina got mentioned in there. Then it's like, Ward was like, it'll be interesting to see what happens there and what happens with the rankings. No, it won't. The ranking, it won't be interesting to see what happens with the rankings when those 2 teams when they get done playing. So not a very eventful call. There's really I don't think there's a ton of room for argument right now in where things are. So The South is not happy. I'll say that. Not that anybody expected them to be, but I think it's all going to right itself here in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the same call as the previous call and the call before that. Maybe a few of the names have changed, but we haven't really, since the rankings have come out, how many major events have we had to go through in terms of just absolute upheaval? We had the week where, what was it, 3 and 4 both lost, and that changed, the complexion of some things. But you're just gonna, go ahead.
Yeah, there's more upheaval when there's 4. When you're like, we are now locked out as opposed to 12. The upheaval isn't nearly as much because you're still in. So even if there is some shifting, it doesn't seem like there is as much because there's still so much stability with the 12 teams. Whereas when you drop out of that 4 before, it was like, how do we get back in? And you're trying to figure out how do you get back in? You can't unwin losses, unlose wins. You can't unlose losses, so now there's just more leeway. So I think there's more stability. So it seems like there's not much change, even though there are some fluctuations, like with Boise State this week, ending up getting that bye. We'll see if they can hold on to it. It looks like they can because, will the committee value BYU or Colorado win over BYU or Colorado more than what they valued from Boise State this season? It's another data point, but I don't know that will be enough for them.
Mm-hmm.
So have we gotten all the super chats, you guys?
We have hit all the super chats.
We are caught up on the super chats. We want to thank everybody who has jumped in with the super chat. We always welcome them. We try to get to them as quickly as we can. Maybe outside of King Bronco Wolverine, whatever the hell his name is. I do not have my Dakota ring.
Do we want to run through just some of the starred questions real quick? Just kind of do a little bit of a lightning round?
If you want to do a better job of sorting through them, because obviously I was just starring everything.
Yeah. Rusty Jesse says, what will we be talking about next week? The playoff or the NCAA Michigan love affair?
I think both, perhaps.
There's no guarantee that anything is going to be out. Just because Michigan has to respond doesn't mean that it's going to be leaked or released or anything like that. I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't talk about it, but what are we going to know? It's not until the FOIA, kicks over on the NOA, which, one of the insiders over at 11 Dub, and by that I mean one of the people who post over there, makes it sound like it might be like December 20th, like the last business day before Christmas or whatever. And that's if they don't sit there and, stretch it out for whatever reason, which we see all the time in FOIA requests.
All right, let's hit another one. See, this is everyone has strong opinions on exactly what would happen. Doug Shepard, Minnesota, a middling Big Ten team would crush Vanderbilt. Yep, exactly. Well, and I give that exactly as much credence as the, we all know what would happen if Alabama played Indiana. I mean, do we? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, we watched Alabama lose to Vanderbilt this year. This is in reference to the Southern teams potentially having to come north for the first round of the college football playoff. Larry Ventresco says, during the Tennessee-Georgia game, one of the heated benches for Tennessee quit working and the players were complaining that they were cold. Wait till they have to play in the 20s and 30s.
The idea that there has to be
those COVID bubbles that they used to make you eat when you had to eat outside, you couldn't eat inside, and you were in the north, and they made you sit in like some little bubble or something like that. But or a heated knocker ball.
Who would even think to bring heated benches to an SEC game like to Georgia? Maybe I can understand Tennessee, but the game was in Athens, right? So what is the threshold for heated benches? Is it 55 degrees? Like, I know it.
When do you turn on your seat warmers in your car? At what point do you turn on your seat warmers on your car? I remember growing up in Southern California, and if it was 49 degrees or less, I refused to ride my bike to school as a kid, and I would demand that somebody would drive me to school, or that I would I'm just not going to school, and that line never worked. So somebody always drove me to school at that point.
If it was under 40, if it was 40 degrees we would play in basketball in shorts outside. If it was under 40, maybe some long sleeve shirts.
I was just about to say that you can't call people soft for this because it's like you're living in a place where you never feel these temperatures. So it's just, you're not acclimated to them. But in the case of Kevin, that is extremely soft. Soft. Not 70. Chuck McFarland says, hypothetical, what would happen if Oregon remains undefeated and rests their players in the championship game? So if they do that, then they would presumably lose, and then they would be presumably the 5 seed unless they get absolutely drubbed. But, at that point you have a season worth of wins where you have been deemed the number 1 team in the country, and you have a win over Ohio State, and you have a win over Boise State. And, I think at that point you're probably the 5 seed. I don't think there's any chance that you see teams do that, but if they did, that's what it would be.
Yeah, I don't think they would either. But if you did it, you would be judged on how well you do in that game, just like they did with Florida State. Yep. So beware, if you get blown out, you're going to drop well below 5, I think, at that point, because also the committee wouldn't want to, they'd want to set the precedent of not rewarding that kind of behavior.
Yep. Yakov wants to know, Kevin, how good would it be for ratings if Colorado can win the Big 12 and make the CFP?
Is there really that many people nationally that are all in on Colorado to turn on the televisions? Winning the Denver television market isn't going to get you a whole hell of a lot, but then we're talking about getting into the CFP. There certainly are the people who don't like Colorado for one reason or another, whether it's Deion fatigue or just Deion dislike or the way that they turn over their entire roster, or that they're trying to be nouveau riche, whatever. I think that people who watch football and understand football are not going to be all that excited about watching Colorado taking the spot of somebody else that maybe could play a little bit better, but it's going to still be the spot that BYU is in right now. It's going to be one and done more than likely, unless it's just some sort of weird matchup, and people will be like, well, you just don't like Colorado. Well, I don't, but I don't see some sort of ratings boon.
I do. People want to watch them now. I think last year they had some of the most top rated games. I think the committee or the networks would pump up a Colorado Ohio State game to high heaven.
Yeah, well, it's not just Deion. I mean, you've got Travis Hunter, you got Shedeur Sanders. Those are players who are. Travis Hunter very well may win the Heisman this year. So if you have Heisman winner Travis Hunter going to play Ohio State, that promo looks pretty good, and it's not just, hey, it's the Jewish quarterback at BYU against Ohio State. Like no one's turning the TV set on for that one if they're not an Ohio State fan.
Travis Hunter versus Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, Travis Hunter versus Jeremiah Smith is box office.
There's something there, but the thing is that how many more television sets is it turning on that weren't already going to be on? Because as Yakov put, it's how good for ratings. If you're already getting this level of a rating based on Ohio State versus Team X or whatever, I mean, how much further are you up or whatever? I don't know. The thing is that college football ratings are never NFL ratings, and certainly are never Super Bowl ratings or Tyson Paul fight ratings or whatever. So, I don't, it's not going to be a case of where I think 3 million more national households turn on because of it. I think that think that there could be some markets that are up a little bit, but I also think there's some other people who could be like, I'm going to watch any playoff game that I can, though.
Next one from Fort Wayne Buckeye. And in all honesty, who has Texas beat? They get the same pass as Indiana and Penn State.
They beat Michigan, and that's about it. Oklahoma.
So, Tony, they played a whole season in the SEC. Certainly, they must have a boatload of quality wins, such as Colorado State, Michigan, UTSA, ULM, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, lost to Georgia, won by 3 at Vanderbilt, beat Florida, won by 10 at Arkansas, and then they finish with Kentucky at home and at Texas A&M. I look at that. I look at that team and that schedule, and it's like, I all year have kind of assumed like, well, they're going to put it together and then they're going to be one of these teams that's really a national championship high level contender. And it's like you look, and they're 3, but I don't,
I'm not going to be shocked at all.
I don't feel great about it. And frankly, if they lost to Texas A&M, I wouldn't feel like it would be a travesty for them to miss the playoff entirely. I don't think they would based on the fact where they are right now, but I don't feel like it would be a travesty if they missed out.
Well, I mean, if you can only take 4 and they lose to Texas A&M, the teams that would be vying behind them would have better wins than anything Texas has. So they would have an argument to get in there, like a Tennessee or something like that, where they have a better win than anything Texas has. So if you all have the same amount of losses, then it's something to consider.
Well, and we're still playing the game each week of, damn it, Quinn, bring in Arch. I mean, it's not necessarily like Texas is. I mean, yes, all right, Texas is 3 and everything else. Some of that I think is legacy now at this point. You get preseason and you get preseason ranked, and then you get ranked in the first CFP rankings, and it's hard to move somebody off of that unless there is an absolute reason to. But Texas has its warts like anybody else.
Question. This was earlier. Ethan Maxfield wants to know, is Aaron Scott injured? He missed last week. He was out for last week's game against Northwestern. We don't have an update on him yet for this week. Day didn't give an update on him today, did he?
No. And that, I think he kind of maybe just hit his head. Perhaps like, I'm not a doctor, but that's what it looked like when he was leaving the field, but it could be anything, but it wasn't anything major and it's not long lasting. He'll be back this season based on what hasn't been said, basically.
Yeah. Godoc says, how many of you think OSU should be number 1? Very curious.
Nobody.
If Oregon is unbeaten and Oregon has a win head-to-head over Ohio State, I don't think there's really much of an argument.
No, not me.
I want to jump in really quick because I'm still seeing it in the comments for people who've jumped in late at this point. Yes, we've heard a rumor circulating right now about an Ohio State injury. Obviously, we are on the air as we speak and are not working phones. Ohio State very hinky about putting information out about injuries. We are not ignoring it to be cruel or anything else. We just want to be right. Accuracy means everything to us. So don't feel that we are ignoring you and not hearing you. We love all of our posters on here. We're trying to do this the right way.
Right. Here's how this works. You have to have 2 sources on this to report it, because otherwise you throw something out there and then you're wrong and then you're the idiot. And so there are people who are fine with being the idiot because they'll say it and then if they're wrong, they'll just delete their posts and ban anyone who remembers that they were the idiot. So that's not how we choose to operate. So we'll have plenty of conversation tonight, I'm sure, on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But right now, as Kevin said, we are on the air and doing this, so we're not currently working the phones to get our 2 sources on that. Mike Ferguson says Georgia in the All-Straight Safe Driving Bowl.
That's a loss.
That's Bootzilla says, I wonder if it would be a whiteout game for Penn State if Penn State is either the Friday or Saturday night game in Happy Valley for that first round, right now against Georgia. I would bet they would treat it as a whiteout. I mean, they have typically done that, and this is a once-a-year thing, but home playoff game, prime time, I would be hard-pressed to not make that a whiteout if I was Penn State.
Day or night, why not go at it? I mean,
yeah. Well, and really, if it's Georgia-Penn State, we talked about this earlier. You might have been off already, but Georgia-Penn State, those are 2 big brands. With the other matchups that we're talking about here, potentially in the first round, Ohio State, BYU, Indiana, Ole Miss, Georgia, Penn State is a primetime game, either Friday night or Saturday night. Like
100%,
stop, no argument. So,
yeah.
This is a thing that I was thinking about earlier. Yoo-Hoo says whoever wins it this year is certainly going to earn it. I mean, you look at, we'll take Ohio State as an example. If Ohio State wins the national championship, they would have a road win at a top 5 Penn State team. They would have a win over a, top 5 Indiana team. They would have, if they potentially you beat Oregon in Indianapolis. So then you have a neutral site win over like the number 1 team in the country. Then you'd play the 8 or 9 team, which is really the 6 or 7 teams. You'd have another 6 versus 7 win. Then you'd have potentially another top 5 win in the semifinals. Then you'd have another potentially top 5 win in the national championship. You could finish the year with 6 wins against teams in the top 10. And that's true of just about anyone. I mean, even the teams coming in with kind of crappy resumes right now, even like Texas, for example, right now, we just talked about the fact they haven't really beaten anyone yet. If they win the SEC, they beat Texas A&M. That's a top 15-ish win. And then you win the SEC against probably Alabama. I don't even know the tiebreakers yet, but whoever it is, Alabama or Ole Miss or whoever it would be. And then you beat an Ole Miss type team again. And then you beat another top 10-ish team in the semifinals, and then you beat whoever in the national championship game. That's not quite as impressive as Ohio State's resume, but that's still pretty good. And that's on the side of the bracket where you're playing potentially some weaker teams.
This is going to be the most difficult national championship to win in the history of college football. And you think back to 10, 15 years ago in the Big Ten, 15 years ago, where you could win a conference title being tied with the team that beat you in conference play. Like, we've come a very long distance from what used to constitute a good season to what now Ohio State tying or losing to Oregon twice, and just getting that sort of thing. Like, even having Oregon in the Big Ten now and USC is much different than what it was in the past. So it's more difficult now to win the conference because you have an extra game. You've got better opponents, and then it's much more difficult to win a national title when, it wasn't that long ago, you only had to win one postseason game to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you go back to 2002. Ohio State beats Michigan in the Thanksgiving weekend. I think it was the weekend after Thanksgiving at that point. And then you sit at home because there's no Big Ten championship game, and you just have to go beat Miami, and that's it. And yeah, it's one of the great teams in college football history, that Miami team. But you had to go. You went. That was it. That was a team that went 14-0. They played a tough schedule that year. That Texas Tech team was not bad. That Washington State team was pretty good. They played some good teams throughout the year, and they had to win against Miami when all was said and done. But you had to win one game after December 1st. One game. Now you could have to win 4. You are going to win 4 games after December 1st if you make the college football playoff, or if you make the Big Ten championship game, one way or the other. Either you win that first game and then you can win 3 playoff games, or you lose in Indy and then you have to win 4 playoff games. So either way, you got to win 4 games after December 1st if you make that play in that Big Ten championship game. So
We're in a world where you could actually have a trap game in the playoffs. I mean, because there's so much football to be played still, that you could sit there, and if you play a first round game or whatever, and honestly, 3 of the 4 games, are very exciting to me. The 4th game, I cover one of the teams in it. I'm not necessarily that excited, but could Ohio State have a trap game against BYU? And I did have the opportunity to watch the BYU game against Kansas. I came out, I'm like, how the hell is Kansas, a crappy Kansas team, only getting 3 points, and then lo and behold, Kansas wins the game. So bleep happens. And again, I can say that on a lot of levels.
All right, let's hit one more and then we can wrap it up. Ethan Maxfield says, if Ohio State blows out Indiana, what does the committee do to them? Almost feels like we need it to be a closer game to keep the 9-3, 10-2 SEC teams out.
Yeah, I think there is a danger in Indiana being this being really the second opportunity for them to prove who they are. If it doesn't go well for them, I don't think the committee looks at that Michigan win and thinks, oh, good job, Indiana. I think they look at that as saying Indiana was bleeding in that one, and so they can bleed. And then if they go ahead and look bad against, or if Ohio State makes them look bad, and it's I don't know what the number is to secure a playoff bid, but I think it starts around 17, somewhere in there, and how that 17 looks. If it's 17-0, or Indiana just has no ability to do anything, that's not going to look well for them. However, if they were an SEC team and they had one loss, I don't know how the committee would leave them out with that same kind of schedule. With everything being equal, if you don't look at the helmets or you didn't know the team name, and you look at the strength of record, and the strength of schedule is going to go up this week thanks to playing Ohio State. So all of those metrics will look better. They won't have any ranked wins, which is not going to help them when you're comparing them to teams that will have 2 or 3 ranked wins and only one more ranked loss, basically. So it's dicey. Lose close and you're in. Lose big and you're going to put it up to the committee.
I'll just say really quick, let's not forget who owns the rights to the entire playoffs. Who they can sublet some things off, and they also own the conference contract for a specific league, and so they have the biggest soapbox and the biggest megaphone and everything else. So we're going to hear about it, and the committee in Grapevine, Texas, are the ones that can either fall victim to it or ignore it and keep the noise out. And well, we got a couple weeks to see what happens there.
Well, and you're already hearing about it, but that will go ahead and do it. Before we go, if you want to go ahead and throw the thumbs up on there, we'd appreciate that. If you have not yet done so, like and subscribe and all of those good things to the YouTube channel. And of course, continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up, become a member. First month, just $4.99. Plenty of talk going on right now. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.